Shabbat Shalom. So the Shabbat before Passover is traditionally known as Shabbat HaGadol. And my father of blessed memory, whose yahrzeit we are observing today, always used to say that it was called Shabbat HaGadol because that was the day when the rabbi gave the longest speech of the year. Gadol meaning big in Hebrew. However, since next week is the Shabbat before Passover, but it's literally the day before, it's too late to do anything about it. In many synagogues, the rabbi's lengthy drasha about the rules of Passover is pushed back to this week. So in Toco Hills, everyone's coming back in the afternoon, fortified by lunch, for a lengthy discourse. I don't have quite that much to say. And next week, to make sure you get your real Shabbat Gadol in, we have Cory Booker coming in to give the sermon. You thought 25 minutes was long. I want to offer some thoughts today about Hametz and Matzah, and maybe how they go beyond, those concepts go beyond kind of the dietary or culinary aspect to really where we are in our souls, in our spirits. And so this is a time where many of us are wrapped up in where are we going to get the food we're going to eat for Passover, where are we going to get rid of the food that we're not going to eat on Passover. We are wrapped up in, if you will, getting the bread out. And so the question is in some sense a very simple one. Why do we eat matzah on Passover? Well, the Jews were leaving Egypt. They didn't have time for the bread to rise, and so, right, we eat matzah. That doesn't really answer, though, why not eat chametz, right? On Sukkot, I can have blintzes. It doesn't mean I don't eat anything else, right? Why is it, right, on Rosh Hashanah I don't eat only apples and honey? And so the explanation that some give is that the Egyptians actually invented leavened bread, right? That, the best invention before sliced bread was puffy bread. And so since they also invented beer, they basically figured out if you put the right kind of bacteria, yeast, into your food, it does not kill you, but actually tastes more delicious. And so in essence, by not eating chametz on Passover, we are rejecting the ideology of Egypt, the puffy ideology of Egypt. So in fact, at the very first Seder, even before they left Egypt, they were already eating matzah. It's a way of saying that we are rejecting the values of Egypt. And so therefore, it's not enough to just eat matzah. We have to get rid of chametz. We have to cleanse ourselves, remove, right? Before we take ourselves out of Egypt, we have to take Egypt out of us. On the other hand, one might ask a more subtle question, which is, if chametz is so bad, if chametz represents Egypt, why eat it the rest of the year, right? Wouldn't be Judaism so much better if there were 8 days a year where you were not allowed to eat lobster and bacon and the rest of the time it was okay, right? Just imagine, right, how different life would be. For some people, I think it's actually like that already, but if chametz is so bad, so just never eat it. Fran, you have an answer to that question? Or you just tastes good, right? Okay. Look, I've heard the same about lobster and bacon, so there you go, right? All right. Let me offer you some insight from, of all places, our Torah portion this week. We read in Leviticus 2, Kol hamincha asher takrivu l'Adonai lo ta'aseh chametz. Any offering that you bring to God, any meal offering, any flour offering, cannot be brought chametz. May not be leavened, no seor, no leavening product, and also chol dvash, and no honey may be brought as an offering before God. So this is actually rather remarkable, that the tabernacle and the altar on the temple were actually kosher for Passover year-round, right? That there was never any leavened product, right? That you would bring rams and lambs and bulls and birds, and you would bring oil and wine and many different types of flour offerings. But those offerings, none of them could be chametz. None of them could be allowed to leaven, to rise, to ferment, to get puffy. They were all flat. And so the question is, why would that be? Why would God reject, right? If it is so delicious, why not have it on God's altar? So Sefer HaChinuch, which is an attempt to map out all of the commandments and what they mean, which gets a little bogged down when you get to this part of Leviticus, has a good one. It says that leaven, Hametz, represents ego, represents being puffed up, right? Represents being full of oneself, being larger than oneself. And so, in fact, that is a classic rabbinic view that Hametz represents the ego, and matzah is poor bread that represents humility. In particular, this verse uses a word for leaven. Seor actually means not just something that's fermented, but the fermenting agent, if you will. Seor is actually sourdough. So 5 years ago, everyone suddenly discovered the glories of baking at home, right? Everyone remember this? And so everyone was trying to come up with sourdough starters. And so the way a sourdough starter works is you put a bunch of grain and flour together, and you hope that the right yeast perches on it, and it develops its own little ecosystem. And then whenever you are baking, you take a little bit of this and you seed the dough with the exact mix, the exact right flavors and species of yeast that you want. So there are actually sourdough starters that have been in existence for hundreds of years. In fact, in some parts of the world, there are actually sourdough hotels. So look, if you're going away and you don't feed your cat or your dog for a week, well, I don't know, they'll find something in the pantry, right? But God forbid your sourdough starter should starve while you're away, so you can literally find a sourdough sitter for your sourdough. Wow, like this is a niche market, right? Right, this is, right, if you used to work for the CDC, this is now something you could do, I guess, right? If you're an expert in bacteria. But here's the thing about sourdough, right? The idea is if you are observing Passover, once a year you have to throw out your champion sourdough and start over, right? You can't have your old chametz lying around. So it's actually very humbling that every now and then you actually have to start over, that every now and then you have to say, I am beginning again from scratch. And so there's a sort of forced humility. So I want to take a moment of personal privilege. So this is my father's yahrzeit, and one of the things that I observed about him in his life is that there were a number of times where he really had to start over. He was working on a PhD with Abraham Joshua Heschel, who is one of the greatest Jewish philosophers, theologians of the 20th century. And he was almost done with his PhD when Heschel passed away. And the rest of the JTS faculty hated Heschel because he was too spiritual. And so no one would help my father finish his PhD, so he went off in other directions. And, he left the pulpit. He was in a place where he really couldn't be in that lifestyle anymore because of his health, and he started over a new life, a new rabbinic career. The second thing, just sort of as a little parenthesis, that you were not allowed to bring on the altar was honey, dvash. Now, by the way, in modern Hebrew, dvash is honey from bees. In ancient times, it actually meant fruit jam or even fruit juice, which was the sweetest thing that they had. They did not have high fructose corn syrup, right? They did not have Splenda, right? But if you wanted to make something sickly sweet, fruit juice concentrate was the best thing that you had. And so the idea is that your chametz is a symbol of ego, and your fruit juice is a symbol of perhaps desire or sort of concentrated, right, like yearning for something that's like a little bit too much. That's one reason to not eat chametz. Maimonides gives us another one. Maimonides, always the rationalist, says the idolaters would sacrifice only leavened bread, and they would bring all manner of sweet food and would smear their animal sacrifices with honey. And so God warned us not to offer any of those things again. So the idea is that chametz is like idol worship. And in factually, there's a Haggadah by a rabbi named Menachem Kasher, we're in Appendix 7. So by the way, you think doing the stuff after dinner in the Haggadah is a lot. Imagine getting to Appendix 7 in the Haggadah. Right? Like, Chad Gad Yam, we're done, please. But he actually suggests that one of the things, Hametz, is very different from the rest of kosher. And the reason is that Hametz, the rules of Hametz are actually very similar to the rules of idolatry. Because with Hametz, it's not enough just to not eat it. You also can't have it or see it. And the same is true for idolatry. Not only that, right, you can keep bacon in your house, just don't accidentally eat it. You are not allowed to have chametz in your house at all. You are not allowed to own it or benefit from it. And the same is true of idolatry. And by the way, most non-kosher stuff, if there is a small amount of non-kosher mixed into your food, it is okay. If you find out after the fact that your kosher food was cooked in a dish that might have once had treif in it, it is not necessarily forbidden to eat. Or the classic example is you're making a big pot of chicken soup, you drop a little drop of milk in there. I don't know why you're spraying milk in your kitchen, but if you did, right, does not make the soup non-kosher. Drop the tiniest crumb or crouton into the biggest pot of matzah ball soup, and no dice. You have lost out. You'll be missing your first course. And then the other thing that is unique about chametz and idolatry is they are actually the only prohibitions that can be canceled out through thought, through intention. So idolatry, if an idolater says, you know what, I don't like this idol anymore, I don't believe in Zeus anymore, that idol is no longer forbidden. And if I say, this chametz is no longer mine, I disown it, then you still can't eat it, but you are no longer in violation. You don't have to do anything, you just have to say in your head, no longer mine. And so there's this idea that chametz is attitudinal in that way. The other classic belief about chametz is that it symbolizes the evil urge. So Rabbi Alexandria, we are told in Brachot 17a, would end his daily prayers with this supplication: Master of the universe, you know that we want to act according to your will, but what prevents us from doing so? The yeast in the dough and the oppression of the Gentiles. We would be perfect, we would be saintly, if only we did not have that little bit of the evil urge in us. So we have three different explanations for what chametz is all about. Is chametz about ego? Is chametz about idolatry? Is chametz about our evil urges within us, which are all kind of the same thing, right? Chametz is kind of symbolic of this drive to make ourselves bigger, to ignore God, to worship something other than God. That is the essence of chametz. But here's the question that I kind of started with, and here's the thing that I struggle with, and that this year, maybe we have an answer to in the way that we might not have in most other years. Which is where I came back to when Fran had her answer, it's delicious, right? If chametz is so bad, why not just ban it all the time, right? Just say the sanctuary is going to be gluten-free, right? Then you never have a problem of chametz, right? You don't have to worry. The Kohen is mixing up the flour offering, and he gets distracted. His phone beeps. Oh, crap, now it's chametz. I got to throw it out. No, right? You wouldn't have that problem. Right? And the rabbis plenty of times will make a fence around the law and say, don't even have it in your house because it might end up being forbidden. Here's why you're stuck. Because chametz and matzah are actually two sides of the same coin. The only things that you can use that are kosher for matzah are things that can become chametz. So whether it is wheat or barley or spelt, right? Those are what you can make your matzah out of, but you cannot make matzah out of corn or rice. And by the way, the flip side is corn or rice, no matter how much they want to, no matter how Ashkenaz you are, chametz, rice and corn can never be chametz. No matter how puffy they get, you can make popcorn, you can make rice cakes, they're still not chametz unless you actually sprinkle some wheat on them. And so there's the challenge. If you want to have matzah, you have to have at least the risk of chametz. If you want to be able to observe Passover, it's not enough to just avoid grain entirely. You have to engage with the grain. You've got to confront your inner gluten, wrestle with it, and put it in its rightful place by putting it in the oven within 18 minutes. And so, in some sense, the idea is that when we are making matzah, when we are getting rid of chametz, we are in this understanding that we cannot get rid of our evil urge, that we cannot eradicate our ego, that in fact we are always caught between humility and self-importance, and that somehow we have to find that space in between. That a person who is so humble that they cannot conceive of their greatness will never actually be great. It's particularly tricky this year because normally, you all know the drill. The night before Passover, you search with the candle and the spoon and the feather, and you find the crumbs, and next morning, you burn them, and then it's Seder that night. This Shabbat, this year, it is a rare scenario. It happens about 10% of the time. It happened in 2011, but 2021, but no one was paying attention because it was COVID. And the last time before that it happened was 2008. The next time it happened, I plan to be emeritus. It will be like 2045. So it's not very common, but Passover starts right after Shabbat. So how do I get rid of chametz, right? Normally I burn my chametz the morning before Passover. What do? I'm not allowed to light a fire on Shabbat. And so the tradition is you burn it on Friday. So you get rid of your chametz, you are gluten-free-ish, but then you have a problem. Because remember, even though it would be much easier to just be gluten-free all the time, but we are actually supposed to have grain. And so in fact, on Shabbat, it is a mitzvah to have challah, to start your Friday night dinner and your Shabbat lunch with delicious, fluffy challah, or at least something that is made of grain bread. Well, the obvious thing was, well, I'll just start eating matzah a day early. But you can't do that. The Talmud says that anyone who eats matzah the day before Passover, it is like someone who sleeps with their fiancé the night before the wedding. To which a famous medieval atheist said, I have tried both and there is no comparison. But here's the thing, the idea is that matzah needs to feel new. It needs to be a fresh taste. If you just had it the day before, it's not special. It loses its impact. So what do? Well, one solution is to eat challah very carefully. So you have like challah rolls, like you put out a tarp, right? You have, and then what do you do with the crumbs? Well, if you have a dog or a cat, it's easy, right? Or remember what I said earlier, chametz is like idolatry. It can be annulled with intent. So you can say those crumbs, any crumbs that I see, I should brush away, but I can put them in my garbage can and they are no longer mine. I no longer have chametz even though they're sitting in my garage. I can't eat it. It's no longer mine. The other solution is to have egg matzah. And you say, eggs, at these prices, who could manage such a thing, right? But egg matzah either has eggs in it or has fruit juice, what our verse this morning called dvash. And so Ashkenazim don't eat egg matzah on Passover because the whole idea of that fruit juice is like another kind of chametz, right? If chametz is like ego, then fruit juice is like desire, right? If you've ever seen kids running for juice boxes at a birthday party, you know what I mean. And so the idea is that egg matzah is not eligible to be real matzah because it has fruit juice in it. It is not leavened, but it's kind of leavened. So you can't use egg matzah at your Seder, right? The box, egg matzah, has like a big warning label on it, right? Like, should only be eaten by the elderly and the infirm, right? If you ever look read the warning labels on matzah, right? They should really warn you, let my people go, right? That's a whole other warning that should be on matzah. But the idea is, so what do we do on this Shabbat when we are in between Hametz and Matzah? We eat egg matzah where ego is replaced with desire, where we are not so full of ourselves, so puffed up, right? Egg matzah is not fluffy, but it perhaps has a hint of the desire that is hopefully bringing us towards Passover in the day to come. So let me close with this thought. It would be much easier to be gluten-free year-round, right? If you wanted to really worry about Hametz, that's what they did in the tabernacle. It is a thing that many people do now for health reasons, right? That would be halachically very straightforward, but the Torah does not allow us to do that. The Torah says, in fact, no, you are supposed to eat wheat every Shabbat. You're supposed to eat wheat on Passover. And the difference is 18 minutes is holy matzah, 19 minutes out of the oven is a holy mess. But that maybe the message of this Shabbat is that it is tricky when we are caught between our own ego, our own desire, and the desire for freedom. That somehow we are caught often in life in this point where we are stuck, where we are not yet ready to leave Egypt, but we are also not ready to, still don't want to be in Egypt anymore. And so perhaps this coming Shabbat, when we are either eating our challah rolls very carefully and making sure the crumbs go somewhere, or eating egg matzah, which is like pseudo chametz, we understand what it means to be trapped between humility and ego. We understand what it means to be trapped between the evil urge and healthy desire. And that maybe then when we sit down next Saturday night to eat our matzah, we appreciate a little bit more that the most important things in life mean engaging with our challenging emotions, mean engaging with ego, means engaging with our urges, means engaging with those things that might puff us up, because ultimately that is the only way we achieve real greatness. Shabbat Shalom.